again, here in the same way as Nick, Michael's using a lot of different kinds of stock, film, video, Super 8, 16, just whatever he can get his hands on. Thank you. So it's funny because, showing these two clips makes it seem like Canada has this real aesthetic of editing, but it's really just about economics. I mean, these guys just went out there, they wanted to make a film, and they got short ends from people, and they used their video cameras, and they just made it work. The last piece I'm going to show you is a piece that I did a couple of years ago called The Barber's Coffee Break. Again, I'll only show you a short segment. And one of the things I was playing around with Ted in The Barber's Coffee Break was this idea of interior and exterior landscape, and that the interior shots in the film are sort of his exterior, his real landscape. It's called The Barber's Coffee Break, so he's in the barber shop or the kitchen of the barber shop. And the exterior shots are his imagination, his dream, his interior landscape, his creativity. And so we'll just show you a little bit of that. There's also some weather issues here, but I think it might be too late to get to those. This was this was an improvisation, just a note. It's disappeared. No. There it is. Thank you. I'll just stop there. Thanks very much. I guess, there'll be more time during the breaks and just before dinner, I guess, to chat. Thanks, guys. I forgot to play my harmonica for you. I was going to play "Oh Canada." Oh well, maybe later.
I have a proposal that we take a really quick break, as long as it takes, there's a little food left downstairs, you have to use the bathroom, like 10 minutes max, and that we come back, then we leave as much time as we can at the end for discussion, and all the panelists, I'll ask all the panelists to sit down front so they can also answer questions.
Oh, thank you.
So how's Allison Lori doing? What's Allison Lori doing? She's a Canadian.
Yeah, I know Allison very well.
You know how she funds for food.
This summer she went and did like 3 months and basically train hopped all over the States like a hobo.
This is something that I wanted to talk about in the
Paper? Yes, I'm gonna send to. I'm gonna live
talking
here.
about how we make these
Yes,
spot
to,
movies. I'm really interested
yes,
in the agglomeration of transit
course.
movies.
Oh
People
yeah.
think they're making dance movies, but you get transit
I
modes
know,
and
yeah.
everything is
This is Laura Toller's. Oh, it's you? We have a lost child down here.
It's me. Where's my mommy? Oh. Okay.
Is that in your way?
Are you going to start? Or I'm going to start. You're going to introduce? What time is the show going to start? Oh, out of here by 6? Oh, we still have our 2 hours.
No, because there's the discussion afterwards.
Which was,
Remember? There's a half an hour discussion afterwards, so we should
be done by 5:30,
try to end at 5:30.
hour and a half. Okay.
It's gonna be a little hard.
Okay.
Because each of my pages takes 2 minutes.
Oh,
And I also
okay.
realize their version English is,
that's right, right. I'll talk faster. I'll speed up. Okay.
Okay, so will I.
Okay. Go ahead.
So, I guess we're going to begin the final panel of the symposium. And we're going to try and get through this as quickly as we can so we have time for discussion. And there's an idea has been floated that, because it's going to, again, be a short span between the end of the day and the screening, that if people are interested in chipping in on pizza, that they'll deliver pizza here. Yeah, so, and we could just use the parlor and, do our thing there.
But
So-
the important question is which pizza place?
Yes.
And can we have beer?
And I've prepared a little paper about that. So okay, so anyway, I'm throwing that out, and if y'all are interested in that afterwards, we can facilitate it.
Great.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Thanks. I wanted to just start out by saying what an honor it is to be on this panel and to be a part of this wonderful symposium. When Doug first asked me to be on this panel, it wasn't until later that he gave me the title of it, which is Recorporealizing the Body via Screen Dance. And as Amy Greenfield did yesterday, I immediately went to the dictionary to find out what that really meant. So I will take off from there. The dictionary defines corporeal as having a material body, tangible, physical. Therefore, I would interpret the title of this panel as the rematerializing of the body via screen dance. For me, it does not mean replacing the body, but rather creating a new materiality, one that is made of light, celluloid, electromagnetic particles, or digital information, rather than of flesh, bone, and sinew. Both forms of materiality create image, one dense, the other etheric. One has a limited lifespan, the other a potentially timeless one. The corporeal body's movements are replicable, but not exactly repeatable, while the screen body's movements are unchanged from viewing to viewing. I would like to include in my comments this afternoon a perspective from a panel I was on last year at the International Dance and Technology Conference at Arizona State University. The title of that panel was content and the seeming loss of spirituality in technologically mediated work. While these two panels might differ somewhat, issues of corporeality and spirituality can be viewed as distant points on a continuum of existence. As a duality, they define each other. The word spiritual is defined in the dictionary as not material, incorporeal, of or pertaining to the spirit or soul, not physical. It has been my experience that this duality of the corporeal and the spiritual can find unity, balance, and expression in the process of making and appreciating art. Today I will discuss further some issues inherent in the duality of corporeality and spirituality as they relate to screen dance, and I will also discuss and present a short video of a creative project that I feel explores this duality in a novel way. In his book, The Awakening Heart, John Welwood describes two fundamental tendencies in human nature: the desire to realize one's individual nature and the strong need to merge with or be a part of something larger than oneself. These two tendencies of human nature can be conceptualized as the individual or corporeal self and the transcendent or spiritual self. For me, it has been through the aesthetic experience that the integration of the individual and the transcendent, the corporeal and the spiritual, can occur. And it is through this integration that a simultaneously individual and collective understanding of what it is to be human emerges. Metaphor is a means by which we can recognize something of both our human and transcendent natures. When a work of art resonates, and of course what comprises that will be different for each of us, the boundaries of our individuality soften, and we can seem to merge with the object or the experience of the performer or performance. We experience a unity that transcends our physicality while being defined by it. That is, our very materiality is the basis from which transcendence can occur. Corporeality, therefore, is essential to our understanding of the non-corporeal or transcendent self. Knowledge derives in part from such experience of resonance, and this experience can be a most meaningful teacher. Knowledge is not solely based on an understanding of abstract concepts or beliefs, but rather on embodied experience as well. I believe that while knowledge may begin at the factual or conceptual level, in order for something to be truly known or understood, the experiential component is essential. When viewing a work of art that resonates, it is the embodied knowledge held within both the viewer and the work of art that resonates, and it is that resonance which facilitates the experience of transcendence. There is mutuality in the process, a reciprocal relationship through which is satisfied the desire to realize one's individual nature and the strong need to merge with or be a part of something greater than oneself. In 1992, I began a collaborative relationship with video artist Doug Rosenberg. We have created 2 works together, each spanning a number of years, each integrating video and technology to varying degrees in live performance. The project I'd like to present this afternoon is the first of the 2 works, titled Singing Myself a Lullaby, which was a multimedia performance work performed by Bay Area dancer John Henry. Created in collaboration with Doug, composer Victor Spiegel, and stage designer Jack Carpenter, the performance piece was an evening-length work examining the image of the self as one individual prepared for his death from AIDS. AIDS was not the primary subject of the piece, but rather the catalyst for self-examination. An investigation of identity, Singing Myself a Lullaby presented numerous vignettes from John's life, interspersed with more universal movement rituals. This layering of the personal and universal presented life as the construction and dissolution of various identities over time, the overriding metaphor being that death is the dissolution of our identification with the body. I had worked with John 10 years earlier in the Bay Area, and when he first approached me about collaborating with him on a work about AIDS, he said that he'd lost many friends to the disease and that he wanted to respond to these experiences in a performance work. He never mentioned that he was ill. It wasn't until later that he revealed his illness, and with that piece of information, the nature and meaning of the project instantly changed. John and I worked together for quite some time until the main themes of the work started to take shape. These themes were taken directly from John's life experience, and while his individual experiences might trigger some identification by audience members, I knew that these personal experiences needed to be encompassed by more universally resonant images. This was addressed by placing vignettes from John's life within a greater, more expansive context, one that created non-narrative reflective space. In this way, there was a gentle oscillation between the individuality of John's corporeal self and the potential for connection with his non-corporeal or transcendent self. We premiered the work in Tucson in 1995, and during the next year it was performed at the New Performance Gallery in San Francisco, at PS 122 in New York, and then we returned to San Francisco where we were part of the Edge Festival for New Performance in the spring of 1996. John died 2 weeks after the final performance. Each performance of the work was different, as video footage was used increasingly to replace John's live performance as he grew weaker from the illness. It was our intention that the final work would result in a video piece, which has indeed come to pass. The Soros Foundation's Project on Death in America has generously funded the creation of this video dance documentary, and it has also been supported by Wisconsin Public Television, which will broadcast the work sometime later this year. Early on in the process, we began videotaping the material in the piece, knowing that at some point in the future, John would not be able to perform the more rigorous dancing sections. The future existed for us only abstractly, and we approached this issue as both a practical and an artistic matter. Over time, however, what was first abstract and poetic became very real for all of us. As the illness progressed and John's body diminished in size and vitality, the contrast between his real image and his video image was striking. We realized that embedded within the artistic vision of the work was a visual chronicle of a dying man, and that with each performance, that chronicle became more complete. Like an extended crossfade from flesh to projected image, the ultimate completion of the work was predicated on the death of the performer. The irony of this experience was that as a friend, watching John's body diminish in size and vitality was devastating. And yet, at the same time, as an artist, I was fascinated by the gradual displacement of his corporeal being by his projected image on stage. On stage, the scale of the video images gave new form to the larger-than-life projected energy that had so characterized John as a performer. The scale and the close-up shots also brought us into a more intimate relationship with John's body, which was the source and the arena for the work. The video also allowed us to see aspects of his illness that might not have been readily visible from a proscenium stage. It was of critical importance that we make a work of art that defined John not simply as a dying man for whom we mainly feel sympathy, but rather as a man offering us an opportunity for our own self-reflection. And by participating in this way with John, we experience the work not only as a meditation on death, but an affirmation of life. And I'd like to show now, AJ, a 10-minute demo tape that we used for fundraising purposes.
But I really wanted to deal with it as a life process, because that's what it's about. It's about living fully until life is gone. And when it's extinguished, I will leave images behind, memories that I imprinted. And to me, that was the importance of the work. While I'm on stage, in the environment that Ellen and Doug and Jack and Victor and so many others have created for me, I feel like I can deal with the disease in a managed way.
I think what we endeavored to do was to create a space for John to perform his life in. And that space is a safe space. It's a space that is reflective of his life. It's autobiographical. It talks about the past and talks about the present. And it's a space that he can feel comfortable in.
Our son, another, is
Lauren Bacall. I always thought she had such an elegance. As I grew older, I realized that was just how I saw her, or wished her to be. My mother could never be Lauren Bacall, but I could.
You don't have to act wasted. You don't have to say anything, and you don't have to do anything. Not anything. Oh, maybe just whistle. You know how whistling works. You just put your lips together and blow.
We videoed hours and hours of improvisation based on certain instructions that I would give him. I approached it to address the disease, not the subject, but the actual reality that was going on inside of his body. After many days of improvisation and videoing the improv, we looked at these tapes and talked about what was going on within these sessions and found that there were certain themes that were emerging for him. One was his relationship with his mother, his experiences in Vietnam, his life as a dancer, his being gay in the military, and his having and living with AIDS.
I picked up the 54th Medical Field Evac Hospital when I got to Fort Dix. I thought we were going to Germany. It turned out they had just come from Germany. We were on our way to Vietnam. When we would go to a village to pacify, the older people would sit on their haunches and cry, beg, and picket flies, like agitated monkeys. Now where was I, an 18-year-old from the malls of the San Fernando Valley, supposed to pick up the understanding to deal with something like that?
My attraction to the piece was that I saw it as an opportunity to create a palimpsest for this man's life, John Henry's life, part of which, and contained in which, was the fact that he was dealing with this disease. And so early on, some 3.5 years ago, we had to look down the road to a time when John wouldn't be able to perform the piece. And so we began to shoot images, shoot footage of John going through the choreography, reciting the text, doing all of the things that we thought would be included in the piece in preparation for that time. So now, 3.5 years later, we have had to face that reality, and that which we sort of looked at poetically 3.5 years ago is now a very, very concrete reality. And the fact is that John can't do the things that he did 3.5 years ago. So we've begun to change the piece and to add in the footage and add in a lot of the imagery that we shot
This is my
at
language.
the beginning. And so the piece has changed very much.
This is my voice. This is how I speak.
Eventually, the process revealed that as I disappear, all of the elements will be balanced. And so we started that process almost 4 years ago. And it's been grueling at times, painful, but very rewarding.
it was important to me to try to set up a structure in which we could look at death as transformation. And so what came out for me were these series of rituals in which we look at self-image and how we identify with images of ourselves throughout our lives. And as we grow and age and mature, we let go of those images and move on to other images. And that this death is yet a deep, deep way of letting go of an image we have of ourselves as being in the body.
When I step on the stage, I step into an environment. Each time, it's the first time or the last, I don't know. This to me is very pleasing and fulfilling. It's been worth it.
I have learned and continue to learn so much from this project. This work has given form to issues of identity, loss, and transformation, which are universally important themes. What I have also learned was the power of the projected image to infuse the performance space with both energy and metaphor, adding layers of information not possible through a purely choreographic language. And as we've discussed over these past 2 days, I have grown to see the camera as a tool with which to magnify and reveal the human and corporeal. Like the amplification of an acoustic instrument, there become available certain pitches and timbres that were previously below the level of perception in a theatrical performance of dance. The increased scale of close-up shots projected to a large size, along with a variety of camera angles, reveal nuance in gesture and facial expression often not seen from the stage. Previously, much of my fascination with movement was either its emotionally expressive capabilities, the sympathetic kinesthetic response it stimulated, or the construction and development of a choreographer's unique movement language and choreographic structure. Over the years, I have found that fascination waning, and in its place, a growing appreciation for the simple, authentic movements of human expression. The camera's eye has infinite potential. to reveal, magnify, and intensify that simplicity, and as such has augmented and expanded my palette of expression. Doug and I begin editing the final video dance documentary next week. As we embark on the final phase of this project, which we began 8 years ago, we will be creating the final fixed document in which we layer together all of the images from the process. John died 4 years ago, and yet, in this new materiality of light, electromagnetic particles, and digital data, the image of his flesh and bone will have a new and lasting life, a recorporealized life on the screen. Moreover, John's rematerialized image offers to a much larger audience this time an opportunity to address once again the larger issues of identity, loss, and transformation. Thank you. Thanks. Should we do questions or wait? Okay, questions at the end.
Before I begin, I just would like to say 3 brief things. One is that since Noel Carroll had another obligation and couldn't be at this session in the audience this afternoon, I'm just going to feel perfectly free to use all those words that this morning he deemed obsolete, like screen dance, video dance, and so on. The second thing is that I have to apologize for the quality of the video clips that I'm going to show. As any of you who've tried to work with older videos from the 70s know, and this is a dub of something from the 70s, you can't get things from WNET. It is not clear and fresh. It's muddy, but I think you'll see what I'm trying to show in my analysis of this piece, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And then the third thing I'd like to say is thank you to the students in my dance history class this past semester who really contributed to my ideas and in many ways inspired this paper. It's called Making Tharp Baryshnikov. In 1977, Twyla Tharp's Making Television Dance, an hour-long videotape made in collaboration with director Don Mischer for WNET's Television Laboratory, was aired nationally on PBS. Also, if I'm going too fast, just yell out, because I have a lot to say. So I'm going to talk a little fast. Okay, so this was aired nationally on PBS in 1977, Making Television Dance. Today, I'd like to analyze a small portion of Making Television Dance, Tharp's brief solo, which ends the screen dance event. I will argue that in this solo, Tharp seems to recorporealize herself as Mikhail Baryshnikov, even a Baryshnikov with enhanced powers. Watching the dance now and thinking about the historical context of the piece relative to the emerging feminist movement of the 1970s, one wonders if she does this partly to assert, through her screen choreography, a feminist political stance of women claiming equal rights with men, perhaps even claiming superior powers, as if to say, in this case, anything you can do, Misha, I can do better. Yet paradoxically, through her assertion of what one might call masculine privilege, which I put in quotes, in a complexly layered, gender-bending screen choreography, she also seems to argue for an inclusive androgyny that expands dance roles for both men and women. In the mid-70s, when WNET first commissioned her to create Making Television Dance, Tharp, of course, had reached a turning point in her career as a choreographer. She had moved from the downtown avant-garde and the university and museum circuit in which some downtown dancers traveled to commercial and artistic success, and her style and ambitions changed accordingly. In 1972, the Bix Pieces had its premiere at the International Festival of Dance in Paris. That dance, with elegant satin costumes and sensuous, silky dancing set to popular music of the 1920s, was far removed from the rigorous Tharp pieces of the late 1960s, which were often complex meditations on mathematical structures danced in silence. For instance, the 100s was, according to Tharp, 100 11-second segments performed by 2 dancers in unison. Then 5 people each do 20 different segments simultaneously so that the 100 segments are represented in 1/5 the time, and then 100 people each do 1 segment in 11 seconds. The studio introductions section of Making Television Dance graphically traces Tharp's upward career trajectory in geographical and architectural terms as she rehearses etudes for the individual members of her company in various dance studios, from her first very tiny and dilapidated studio on Great Jones Street off the Bowery to the high precincts of American Ballet Theater's rehearsal halls uptown. By the mid-'70s, that is, Tharp, working in television and film and receiving commissions from major ballet companies, as well as producing seasons by her modern dance company in New York, had quite consciously become a commercial success, something still disdained by her peers in the downtown dance world at that time. And I could, if I had more time, I would have a lot more to say about that in itself as a certain kind of feminist gesture. It's in my footnote. Making Television Dance has a distinctly 70s look. Oh, and I should just also say it also had to do with her relationship with her husband. So you can ask me about that during the question period. Making Television Dance has a distinctively 70s look, not only because of the ways the dancers and film crew dress, wear their hair, and talk, but especially because it mixes raw documentary black and white video with polished color images, at least as polished in some other version than mine. Underscores through both images and commentary the workliness of dance and art, and also intensely emphasizes process over product. Indeed, we see a great deal of the backstage process of making this piece, but we never do see the entire dance piece that is supposedly this dance piece that they're performing as part of this documentary. At the end of the documentary, we never see that particular piece, which doesn't seem to have a name, performed live. And of course, that is because this dance piece never really existed live, and I put live in quotes. Studio audiences saw the dancing as it was being filmed, but the piece itself, made for the television screen, is inseparable from what the live studio audience could not see. The camera work, close-ups, long shots, pans, and so on, the editing, and the video effects, such as keying, retrograde, multiple images, and superimposed frozen moments. What we, the television audience, see as the finished product, what was ultimately broadcast of this, well, Making Television Dance, I know it's confusing, but when I say the finished product, I mean Making Television Dance, this video that was broadcast, is a composite of process and several different finished products. For Making Television Dance is basically a view of the inside, not the outside, of a lengthy cinechoreographic process. Making Television Dance is also very much a piece of the 70s in that it expresses certain feminist values, one of which is a brand of liberal civil rights feminism, claiming equal rights for women on the dance stage and in the dance profession, as well as in the television studio, where very few women worked as directors, and in intellectual life. Tharp and other women choreographers of the 1970s claimed equal rights for women by creating dance images of women as intellectual powerhouses. Tharp's work at this time parallels that of so-called liberal feminism, which sought equal opportunities for women in the workplace, at home, and under the law. In Making Television Dance, part of what we witness in the process is that Tharp is very much in charge of this project, and although experimenting with a new form, she is well on top of her learning curve in terms of learning to deal with television technology as well as the television crew, and this reminds me of something that Laura Towler was talking about yesterday. Her voiceover commentary, Tharp's that is, especially, signals her position as a woman who is confident and authoritative, an expert in her profession. In this respect, she claims equal rights with men to be in charge, to direct not only a dance company, but the making of a television program. Yet I would say that in Tharp's work of the mid-1970s, one can also see other feminist strands, including a playful commitment to confusing gender codes and appearances for other reasons than equal rights feminism, for aesthetic, that is, as well as moral purposes. Unlike her downtown peers, who created a dance community based on alternative political structures like the Collective, where women could flourish in a supportive atmosphere, in the mid-'70s, Tharp chose to challenge the gender prejudices of the ballet establishment. She was well aware of the glass ceiling for women choreographers in the hierarchical world of ballet, where even in the 21st century, for the most part, men create dances and women dance them, along with a few male superstars. And yet, Tharp's account of her own assertive negotiations with the management of American Ballet Theatre regarding her contract for Push Comes to Shove, the ballet she created for Baryshnikov around this time, sounds remarkably like Agnes de Mille's story of her own intransigence when it came to creating Rodeo for the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo in the early 1940s. Of course, several of Tharp's works of the mid-1970s, and especially the solo in Making Television Dance that we're going to see at the end of my talk, have something important in common with de Mille and with Rodeo, in that they set American vernacular country dancing into a ballet context, although Tharp does this in gender-bending ways that de Mille actually approached with her all-woman cast of the earliest versions of Rodeo, but could not, I think, in the 1940s fully realize. Tharp may also, I think, have been inspired by Balanchine's various Americana dances, especially his square dance, originally choreographed in 1957, but revived for the New York City Ballet just in time for the US bicentennial in 1976. Though she didn't have a caller on stage, as Balanchine had in his square dance, Tharp's musical choice for the studio event in Making Television Dance was what she identifies as bluegrass music, but perhaps it's better characterized as country fiddling, closely related to square dance music. In this videotape, the whole thing, Making Television Dance, one of the things she creates, one of the finished products, is a screen square dance for herself. This too bespeaks a 70s sensibility. With the celebration of the bicentennial and its attendant nostalgia for Americana in 1976, there was an enormous resurgence of square dancing. Country dancing, line dancing, and country music were also linked to the bucolic hippie Back to the Land movement, of which Tharp herself briefly partook in the early 70s, and to the Foxfire movement. Indeed, Jimmy and Rosalind Carter, the first family, were known to be avid square dancers, or people about to become the first family at this time in 1976. In Making Television Dance and in her other works of this period that use country music, Tharp seems to embrace part of that countercultural ethos while also recognizing her need to emerge from it, to move on to a different role, that of a professional woman and serious urban artist. And okay, I will tell you the gossip, because at the time, as she records in her autobiography, she was breaking up with her husband, Robert Hewitt, whose art career she had always deferred to and who now had dropped out to live in the country. And the result was that she moved to a downtown loft to become the single working mother of an infant. So I think that there's a real shift here in her own ethos out of that hippie countercultural Back to the Land and into the urban professionalism that's also linked to feminism. In Making Television Dance, Tharp's love for both vernacular dancing and ballet dancing combined with her mathematical rigor and her dry sense of humor, as she declares the television screen nearly a square, and through video effects, clones herself electronically 8 times to dance all the parts in a minimalist square dance. So let's, AJ, see the first clip.
With the lockdown camera on these marks recorded.
1, 2, 3. There was the downstage to camera vertical right voice. The downstage to camera vertical left. They were joined by the upstage to camera horizontal right voice. Then the downstage to camera horizontal left came on, and more and more and more. Editing possibilities made hay with the classic Baroque concept of canon. 2, 2, 1, 2, 1, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 5, 2, 2, 3, 7, 2, 3, 2, 2, 1, 2, 1, 4, 1, 4, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 3, and 1, 1, and 1, and 1. And that was our simple beginning. A single phrase recorded and overdubbed 8 times in TV, no space.
Stop. Before I go on to analyze the solo, we need to take a brief look together at the section of Making Television Dance in which Tharp and Baryshnikov rehearse Once More Frank, a series of dances Tharp created in 1976 to Frank Sinatra songs. Television critic John O'Connor, and it's related to a number of her other later pieces to Sinatra songs. Television critic John O'Connor, in his 1976-77 review of Making Television Dance in the New York Times, calls Baryshnikov's presence gratuitous, but clearly it is not. For Tharp is building a visual homology between herself and Baryshnikov in this section, a homology that partly erases their gender differences and also partly emphasizes them. That is, they may still be seen as a heterosexual couple, but a couple perfectly equal in stature, literally as well as figuratively, and in dance capacities, equal in dance capacities, at least in this section. Can we get some of these lights down? Stop. Tharp writes about the process of choreographing for Baryshnikov. As though he had ingested my body, he would mime my action perfectly. Misha was an excellent mime, and he always loved becoming characters, including me. Actually, it was easy for him to pick up my movements because our proportions are uncannily similar, close quote. In Push Comes to Shove, Tharp seems to capitalize on this mimicry and to actually transform Baryshnikov during certain moments into herself. AJ? Okay, stop. Sorry. Yeah. And if we could just now look at the first transparency, AJ. If you noticed his costume, I don't want to go into a lot of detail about this, but it's very almost feminine. I just want to show you Tharp in Sue's leg from a year earlier. Yeah, I mean, it's practically that same image. Okay, thanks, AJ. And actually, in about a minute, we're going to see another photo. But if in Push Comes to Shove, she makes Baryshnikov Tharp, in Making Television Dance, Tharp performs the opposite operation. In Making Tharp Baryshnikov, she takes on a male persona, just as she had earlier in some ways in the Bix pieces. And if we could see the next image, here she's partnering Sarah Rudner in the Bix pieces and taking on the male role. Okay, thanks, AJ. Tharp writes very explicitly, quote, "I have always felt that one of the things dance should do, its business being so clearly physical, is to challenge the culture's gender stereotypes," end quote. In the solo section of Making Television Dance, Tharp's movements are clearly borrowed from a male repertory, both balletic and vernacular. She has appropriated for herself what she calls Baryshnikov's, quote, "unsurpassed virtuosity in the male domain of ballet, jumps, multiple pirouettes, batterie." And for those who don't know the French ballet terms, that means beating of the feet up in the air together. Okay, the next video segment. And this is Baryshnikov in Le Corsaire, as filmed for The Turning Point, 1977. So this is the kind of thing she's going to do in her solo, which I will show you eventually. But she'll do it better in certain ways through video. Stop. Okay. Now, in the solo of Making Television Dance, Tharp has simultaneously successfully borrowed from male balletic virtuosity and the loping cowboy stance and dance that DeMille's cowgirl aimed for in Rodeo. At a distance, as in the rehearsal of the solo toward the end of the program, which we'll see, it's hard to tell whether this figure is male or female, actually, this Tharp figure. Though seen in long shot at a distance, because there is also a smaller version of Tharp on screen, and if you look really hard, you can see that, she seems to be comparatively large scale like a man. I think that second image of her is being used in a certain way to make this other image of her look bigger. She has a short haircut that could serve either sex and is dressed in tight blue jeans, an open-necked white shirt, and shoes with chunky heels, all of which by the 1970s were coded as appropriate in the culture at large for either gender. Although in terms of country music and country dance culture, to wear blue jeans is to be coded as male. So in some ways, she's coding herself as male. She makes bow-legged leg gestures, flails her arms, takes a wide stance, goes down to the floor to spin, does tight virtuosic footwork, swivels her pelvis, swaggers, flexes her ankles, and pulls her body up into a sexy freeze. All of these movements are from the country dancing part of the equation in this little rehearsal, and they are coded as male. Indeed, some of them, for instance, the swagger and the scale of the arm and leg gestures, are also marked as male in the larger culture. So Tharp has supplied us with all sorts of signs, so to speak, to read this as a male image. Let's look at the next brief section. You can see, if you bring down the lights a little bit, you can see that little figure of herself behind her. Stop. In the voiceover narration, earlier in the tape, Tharp identifies herself as coming from the country. Things grow there, she says, marking country roots as vigorous, productive ones. And she states that she associates what she calls bluegrass music with her father, who himself fiddled occasionally and on family trips would fight with her mother when Mrs. Tharp wanted to switch the car radio to the classical music station. Thus, Tharp sets up a gendered as well as a class and national division of culture, in which classical music, and with it, perhaps classical dancing, is identified as female, European, elite, and boring, while bluegrass music and country dancing, including square dancing and this kind of eccentric male solo dancing, is characterized as male, American, folksy, and vigorous. Clearly, Tharp is interested in finding dance vigor, and thus in poaching in male territory. In the final version of the solo, Tharp introduces more balletic movements, multiple pirouettes, rond de jambe, and high kicks or battements that we don't see in this little rehearsal of the solo. But she has both Americanized them, showing, as she had in the Bix pieces, the close relationship, actually, between the vocabularies of ballet and vernacular dancing, and she has also deliberately appropriated them from the male side of the highly gender-coded ballet gamut. Her pirouettes are done with a typically male extended leg that traces a large arc in space as it moves from the front around the body to the back and then closes, rather than staying neatly folded and in place the whole time as the non-working leg does during the turn in a female pirouette. Her leaps and jumps are large and extended like a man's, including a big jump in splits, Russian style. Her arms open wide like a man's, and she doesn't point her foot, she flexes her ankle, rejecting the canonically beautiful curve of the arched female foot in ballet, and opting instead for a chunky male country look. Clunky, actually, that should say. In general, her presentation of her body is broad, almost, shall we say, cocky. Male movement, then, whether in country dancing or ballet, has to do with taking up space, with large bodily gestures, with the handling of the limbs as a single unit, like that, and with asymmetrical, well, especially in the more country dancing, with asymmetrical footwork and arm movements, as well as with a certain assertive energy that Tharp taps into in this solo. For instance, as you'll see when I show it to you in a couple of minutes, there is a moment in the solo after she completes the multiple pirouettes when Tharp moves her arms around in different directions, as she also does something quite different and large with her legs. I mean, she kind of does something like this. And to me, this is an image of what one might call spatial dominance and assertive agency that in our culture is coded as male, and that is quite different, for instance, than striking a beautiful pose, which is often but not always what's assigned to women in classical ballet. Although there are complicated issues about agency that I've written about elsewhere having to do with women in ballet, but I think that this is a more obvious male-coded way of asserting agency like that. And actually, I should also say that I was really struck in the session just before this one when Steve Jackson showed that film clip called Boy, that these two little boys are doing those same kinds of movements that Tharp, that I want you to notice in this solo by Tharp, of just their arms are going like this and their legs are going up in the air, and it's just claiming space in a very aggressive, wonderful way. Sometimes wonderful, yeah, okay. Except when you're sitting in the back seat of a car with a guy, right, okay. I mean, and it's crowded, and I'm gonna tell you that example later, okay. The camera, too, creates a gender advertisement, to borrow Irving Goffman's term, that at first seems masculine, but then becomes complicated in terms of gender coding. Tharp starts out as a small figure in the frame, mitigating the other masculine signs, and then she grows much larger. But although her scale in the close shot, as she entirely fills the frame, seems to claim space in ways coded as male, and this is what I was referring to before, as in the standard male choice to sit with legs wide apart and take up a lot of space, in contrast to the standard female choice to sit with legs crossed, in our culture anyway, the camera creates a striking ambiguity, actually a kind of double coding regarding gender. As it moves into a close shot, we can see that Tharp's body in some ways may look male, the clothing, the haircut, the movements, but is indeed female. Closer up, even though she's larger and is taking up more space, and that's masculine, closer up we can now see in that seemingly androgynous or even masculine body, her full womanly hips and her delicate face. So we can now see her as both male and female. Okay, so now let's look at the solo, which is just a little under 2 minutes, and then I will conclude. Okay, stop. So, as you must have noticed, with every jump, the image of Tharp frozen in the air lingers on the screen as the dance